Jai Guru.
Jai Guru.
Welcome to the next episode of Awake, the Life of Yogananda, our podcast that goes minute by minute. We have reached minute number 65 today. I'm here with Priyank and Chris. How are you guys doing? Priyank, you look very nice today.
Good. Yeah, just came back from a wedding. I left early because they usually have the photos and stuff. I was like, no, I'm podcasting. You're gonna have to have your photos without me. No one ever looks at those anyway. Thousands of photos. Yeah, this episode should be I reckon it'll be a short one.
We say that often.
Famous last words.
I'm good as well. Happy to be back on the show again. Looking at another minute. It's every single minute there's like a brand new topic, isn't it? So it's always interesting to delve into it with you guys.
Yeah, and the topic today is a sad one. It is Guruji. The last episode ended by him being on this boat, right? He's leaving India again. He's going back to America, and this time the times will be slightly different in America because America was in the middle of the Great Depression already, but now the war rhetoric in the world was flaming up and everything was getting ready, and World War II was about to start. And you then see in this minute, you see a lot of pictures of war. You see pictures of Hitler and Nazis in Germany. And the question comes up, the need for the teachings, is it greater now than ever before? And we will discuss this. But first, we will start with a section where Guruji talked about World War I. Chris, do you want to start this one?
Yeah, sure. I remember that Guruji did talk about this in the autobiography of a yogi. We may all be familiar with it, but just to relive the passage that was in the autobiography of a yogi. Yogananda was in meditation one day, and he was he says in his own words, "One day I entered a motion picture house to view a newsreel of the European battlefields. World War I was still being waged in the West. The newsreel recorded the carnage with such realism that I left the theater with a troubled heart." And he was praying to God, "Why dost thou permit such suffering?" And he says then, to his intense surprise, that an instant answer came in the form of a vision of the actual European battlefields. And the horror of the struggle filled with the dead and dying far surpassed the ferocity of any representation of the newsreel. And a inner gentle voice responded to his consciousness to say that that these scenes are now being acted in France. They're nothing but a play of there's a word I cannot pronounce.
Chiaroscuro.
Chiaroscuro.
I had to learn this word because I was giving a service and they were talking about they were reading this very passage, and I was like, I need to learn this word without pronouncing it incorrectly.
Yeah.
And what does it mean?
It means a play of light and shadow.
Exactly. I'd literally Google it to check the pronunciation before this. Didn't get that. Yeah. Italian word, yeah.
Probably some Latin origin, yeah.
Yeah. So they are the cosmic motion picture as a real and as unreal, as real and as unreal as the theater newsreel you have just seen, a play within a play. But that I remember when I first read that, it blew my mind. Because the analogies of the projection of consciousness and what we are made in the image of God, Guruji goes on to talk about something, essentially this conversation that I had with God, with this inner voice, talking about how we are bodies of light, and that we are made in the image of God, which is light itself and sound. So it was really, introducing these new concepts to me, reading through the autobiography of a yogi. And Guruji is, to his intense surprise, he says, and this answer came to him. So he wasn't really expecting this answer. He was really intently praying. God was listening. And of course, he has a very attuned microphone that he can use. So he was able to get that answer and receive it. So I thought that was incredible and obviously on point to what we're talking about today. Priyank, do you
Yeah, I
have
was
any comments?
wondering, like, and I view, if I would really like these words of just, the world being both real and unreal. This is one of the key take homes that I took away from when I first read the Bhagavad Gita. I was going through a lot of turmoil in my life, and I just pretty much brushed it aside, going, this is just not worth your effort because it's all just some false screen of duality. And then I thought, am I getting into the stage where it's a bit like escapism, where you're kind of using this just as a buffer to protect you from the storm, and then also using it as and the ramification of that is then you treat sort of situations, perhaps even relationships and scenarios such as world wars, with too much of hands-off approach, and not having enough empathy, not having enough involvement, from everything, from world wars to politics to relationships that you have and that you lose sometimes. Yeah, Mike.
I think Chris was before me.
Yeah, Chris.
I have had the same thought, and and the same sort of feeling about this. And I suppose what I've come to conclude is that that's the ego talking. That's the ego saying, well, why the hell bother with all this if it's just all if it's just not real? What is real? So it's a little bit of a backlash of my ego, I feel, whenever I struggle with these thoughts sometimes of why bother with anything.
Is it not just escapism at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, escapism, but that's the ego, isn't it? I mean, because in my understanding,
I think escapism is only ego if you just use it as an excuse. If you use it to the nth degree, then it's a liberating. Is it not a liberating process?
So
being in the world but not of it. It's all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, 100%. Yogananda goes on to say, actually, in the next paragraph.
Oh yeah, let's do it. Oh, Mike's got something first.
Yeah, I actually wanted to pick up on that word escapism as well, because what is it really telling you? That word has a bad connotation to it, right? So it means that you are not fulfilling your responsibilities because they're too difficult for you, so you just live in a dream world. That's kind of what is the picture that escapism kind of paints, right? And I think the idea that Guruji has is not to not solve the problems, it's only just not to let them affect you mentally, right? So in your mind, you don't go over them over and over and torture yourself using them and thinking of how bad everything is. And I think that works well with that analogy of the movie, right? That you watch that movie and then he goes on later, right? He says it's like you're done with the movie and it's like you wake up from a dream, right? And then you're like happy that, oh, you still have all your limbs and nobody died and it's all good, right? And I feel like this is kind of how we need to watch a movie, but yeah, unfortunately, that's sometimes also how we need to look at the world. Terrible things happen in the world, but it's still made for our entertainment. It's really difficult to grasp this concept in reality, and it's even harder to explain it to someone else, because it is like people could say like, oh, you lack empathy, you lack, or you throw this word escapism in there, but it's still the right thing to do, right?
There was a question given by one of our listeners last week in the last episode, and it probably would have been very appropriate to be talking about it here, because I believe the question went something along the lines of there's a lot of trouble in the world. There was a question asked to one of the monks in SRF, and the monks essentially turned around and said to the person not to worry, that we were going into a higher age, that all things would sort of resolve themselves. And the response of the person was to say, well, hold on a second, is this the right approach? And, shouldn't we be doing more or paying more attention and, concerning ourselves more with the troubles of the world? And I didn't get to actually give my 2 cents on that because my internet connection relieved me of that. But
now you're back.
yeah, but it's a good time to pick up on it, maybe, because I think this is really, really on point with what I was thinking, which is there's always going to be the eternal suffering in every age in some way, shape, or form. I don't know about the highest yoga or what happens there, but there's a lot of distraction in the world, and that shouldn't hold you back from your highest goal, which is self-realization. And then, therefore, you would be able to help more people the better equipped you are. One of the people in the London Centre was saying that the more that you improve yourself, the more radiant you become, the more you can change people just with your energy. Like if you're walking through the busy streets of London and you're passing people, you're actually influencing them without you knowing it or them knowing it, which is a really, really cool way of looking at it. That also leads me to say that there's the Buddhist philosophy of attend to the part of the garden that you can reach. And I think that's also really important here. And whenever I was reading about Guruji talking about World War I and all the things that were happening in World War II as well, he's a divine avatar. And he isn't going to go and save people in World War I and II. He isn't going to stop these things from happening. But yeah, he lived through it, and he went on to do what he could do in that time, which is bring self-realization fellowship, and the teachings.
Yeah, agreed. Chris is slightly lagging out.
Same. Should we move to the next point?
Yeah, I think Chris is probably going to read out a little bit more of that story, though. No.
Okay. Let's see if he comes back then.
And then there was my heart was still not comforted. The divine voice went on. Creation is but light and shadow both, else no picture is possible. Did we read that part? I don't think we did.
No. We stopped before.
The good and evil of Maya must ever alternate in supremacy. If joy were ceaseless here in this world, would man ever seek another? Without suffering, he scarcely cares to recall that he has forsaken his eternal home. Pain is a good prod to remembrance. The way of escape is through wisdom. The tragedy of death is unreal. Those who shudder at it are like ignorant actors who die of fright on the stage when nothing more is fired at them than a blank cartridge. My sons are the children of light. They will not sleep forever in delusion.
Who are those children of light?
Us. Adam and Eve downwards, right?
Yeah, definitely. He was talking of his disciples and people who are spiritually minded. And I feel like this group is much bigger now than it was back then, right? I feel like we are in a much better shape. The world is in a much better shape than it was in 1940 or 1945.
Yeah, or the preceding centuries.
Yes.
All the Inquisition days were no better.
Oh my God.
Probably worse, right?
Yes. Oh my God. People did horrible things to each other.
Yeah, for the last 800 or 900 years prior to that.
Yeah. So that's also a perspective we sometimes should look at, that things aren't always perfect and sometimes they're terrible, but in the greater scheme, things are becoming better. And we have higher standards now than we had 100 years ago, for sure. All right, Chris, did you want to add anything to this section?
There was just also a very cool little passage where Guruji, I say cool, I mean fascinating from one point, but maybe not cool is the right word, that Guruji was in meditation, and he saw, I suppose, more than the vision. He was embodying like a captain in World War I, I think it was, and he saw himself running on the shores on a beach, and getting shot in the chest and dying. And he then kind of, as the body was dying, he then awoke from this vision, and then was so happy to have all his limbs, and he was, you know, just touching all his limbs, like in joy, like, oh gosh, I'm back. And that was pretty incredible. You know, he's having these visions, these experiences, whilst the devastation of World War I is happening, you know, thousands of miles away. Pretty incredible. So Priyank?
Yeah, I remember I had something, a vivid wake up from a dream, awakening, I suppose you might call it. I had like some horrific set of circumstances happen to me whilst I was dreaming, and it was really horrific. Like everything, my life was upside down, and I was really down in my dream. Then I woke up and I was like, oh my God, thank heavens that was a dream. Like I looked at my body and looked around, look where I was sleeping and stuff, and it kind of reminded me of like how relieved Guruji was in that vision that he was when he came back to his you know, lotus posture in the Gurpur home that he was in. But obviously his was much more vivid because it actually happened, not just some musing in your dream mind. This was actually, you know, this person probably was going through that experiencing of, you know, being shot in the chest, and Guruji somehow was connected to this person, must be astrally connected. It can't just have been, you know, a random person. It probably was a disciple, and even that you might say that he was connected to, because obviously our guru disciple relationship transcends this individual birth, doesn't it? Yeah, Mike?
That's interesting what you just said. Do you think that's how we feel when we die, that we just woke up from a dream? That we just feel like, oh my God, it was all not real, and you feel like a burden fell off your shoulder, and you feel like, oh yeah, I'm back in the astral plane.
Depends if you're what do they call it, a temporary inhabitant of the astral plane, where you're just coming and going, barely aware, or you're actually there because
True.
you've been liberated from the material plane, or this plane. Yeah.
True. I'm not gonna say I'm looking forward to it, but I'm curious.
I am. Hopefully I make it.
On this note, there's a line here that after Yogananda was saying, you know, am I alive or dead? He was again answered with he described it as a soft rumbling vibration formed itself into words, and it said, what has life or death to do with light? And it goes on to say, you know, behold your dreamless being awake, my child, awake. But what has life or death to do with light is, again, just another mind-blowing sort of statement that is, you could read it past it quite quickly in the autobiography of a yogi, because there's so much great content there. But it is just such a revealing statement.
The next line's pretty good as well. In the image of my light, I have made you.
Yeah.
The relativities of life and death belong to the cosmic dream. Behold your dreamless being. Awake, my child, wake. Amazing.
Can I just say as well, like on the topic of like inevitability, it seems like no matter what the will of one individual or of a group of individuals, like there is a inevitability to these things happening. And in fact, in the first little snippet there of the screenshot that I took from the autobiography of a yogi, God essentially is replying to Yogananda to say the good and evil of Maya must ever alternate in supremacy. And it seems like such an insane statement, doesn't it? Like, it's just inevitable. It's inevitable to fall into the darkest, most evil times where man is seen no more as a bag of bones and meat. And life is meaningless, it's like life is almost worthless in these moments where there's such immense pain and suffering. It's just such a, as you said, Frank, it's just such a difficult terms, to come. It's such a difficult thing to come to terms with, because nobody wants it, right? But it's all part, as Mike said, maybe for entertainment, for it's a play, a theater show for us all.
Yeah, it's like the whole yugas thing again, isn't it? The orbit of our star and solar system around this other plane, whatever it is, and yeah, it's alternating, isn't it? We get to the higher stage, then we've got to go back, and then it just keeps going round and round until we decide that we ourselves have had enough.
Yeah. Pain is brought to remembrance.
And if it was perfect here, then we wouldn't be motivated to go anywhere else, right? So the darkness here is necessary, apparently.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
All right. Should we move on to the next one? There is a section in the Divine Romance, a chapter. It's called The End of the World. It is super interesting. Anyone listening, I would just pick up the book and read it. I read that many times, and it came to mind when I saw this minute. And I think it would be nice if we read it together. I marked sections for you guys too. So it's a talk that Guruji gave in 1940 at Encinitas Temple. So it was, the World War II was already raging at that point. So it was had begun 2 years earlier. And he starts, considering present world conditions, you can well appreciate why I have taken my subject. It's the end of the world.
And this was in 1940, yeah. So this is pretty much, the World War II has just started, and yeah, it's escalating into chaos around the world. Pretty much, it's like writings on the wall, isn't it? Yeah. So he says the trouble in this second age is that there is not enough security, because science plays the part of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Man uses science not only to create and do good, but to destroy as well. Therefore, scientific development is not yet safe. The present world war shows how the technology of science is being used to destroy mankind. Out of the conflict, we will learn how to employ more scientific devices for human comfort. But unless we develop spiritual forces, we will also continue to use scientific knowledge to destroy. People will learn from this war the devastating consequences of the misuse of technology. In the First World War and in earlier times, it was considered chivalrous to fight, but the idea of chivalry has gone. In this war, no one wants to fight. After it is over, there will be so much fear of the world devastation that if anybody tries to start a war, the rest of the world will fall upon that nation. I'm telling you things far ahead of my time. Wow. He's a couple of things come to mind. Obviously, he's talking about the misuse of technology that caused destruction, would be the atomic bomb, which was obviously being developed by many nations at the time, and it came into the 4-5 years after this writing. But also that same technology that can cause so much destruction, Hiroshima, etc. Then it can also, as we now use it in terms of atomic energy and clean, as it were, in terms of emissions, source of supposedly limitless energy source in terms of atomic energy. And yeah, the other thing that's interesting is that any country starts a war, everyone else will just like will go against them, which is kind of what's happening in today's age with Russia, isn't it? we don't want to go into the politics too much, but
yeah.
Chris.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yogananda talks about lifetrons and these new words that we don't have any scientific kind of backing for necessarily, unless guys educate me otherwise. But science hasn't caught up quite yet on that point. But for the guys, Oppenheimer, who was really behind the atomic bomb, he quoted the Gita, didn't he, once completed, which is pretty immense. That how did it go again? I'm the destructor of worlds, something along those lines. It was a quote from the Gita that Oppenheimer made. And Frank, what's the name for people who would follow the intellectual pursuit?
Jnana yogis. Jnana yogis. Yes.
Jnana yogis. It makes me think, like, with these guys, with their ability to pierce the veil of reality and be able to split the atom, and we don't really know what the atom looks like, right? Nobody's ever seen an atom, but we understand it. It's such an achievement of sorts that it's a great thing, right? On one side, but it was used for such a negative consequence, right? So it makes me think, if you go back to that first picture actually that I put in there from the autobiography of a yogi, where Yogananda is conversing with God, God actually goes on to say, if joy were ceaseless here in this world, would man ever seek another? Without suffering, he scarcely cares to recall that he has forsaken his eternal home. Pain is a prod to remembrance. The way of escape is through wisdom. And that last bit, the way of escape is through wisdom. It wasn't a very wisdomful thing to drop a bomb, that destroyed hundreds of thousands of lives necessarily. So without the wisdom attached to the scientific understanding and the greatness that came with that, we got the results of what Yogananda was warning against many years before. What you guys think about that, Mike?
Yeah, I think this is exactly it, right? You have those huge contrasts. You have the world developing technologies that could destroy itself, and the world not being ready at all to handle this responsibility. I mean, if you think they threw the first atomic bomb, or they developed it in the 1940s, imagine the 1840s. I mean, how far away were we technologically from any of this? We were like having the first steam engines and things like that, industrial revolution. So it went very quickly from no industrialization at all to industrialization that can even destroy the whole planet and make it unlivable for all of us, right? So it is interesting. I'm also like the contrast that I was talking about is also that he brings his teachings, Paramahansa Yogananda, in exactly this time, right, to fix it. And so you have this immense amount of darkness and immense amount of light, and now you go like tug of war, right, and see what happens. And this is kind of what World War II is, but it was basically a showcase for the world to show this is all the things that can go bad, and maybe a cautionary tale as well. And then hopefully from there on it will become better. Priyank?
Yeah, the Oppenheimer quote, he kind of said, we knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed, few people cried, most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. I suppose we all thought that one way or the other. And that is from chapter 11, 32 of the Bhagavad Gita, which is a pretty epic use of the scripture. Yeah, Chris?
so completely unfounded here, but I'm going to throw it in because I think it's super interesting. I read somewhere that there was the head of the nuclear programs for the United States, and whilst they were doing all the testing, there was I don't know whether a question or it came up in conversation, but there was something acknowledged by this head of the nuclear program to say that the tearing of say space from the nuclear blasts actually goes into multi-dimensions. It's not just our dimension, so it's actually doing a lot more damage than what we even know of, in this physical plane, because they're testing it in like the white sands over Nevada and things like this, where it's just immense kind of sand and nothingness, no life, so to speak. But then actually it could be tearing, tearing up like different planes of dimensions, which is a really mind-blowing subject. But Mike, just whenever you said the tug of war, between kind of dark and light, it reminded me of the quote, "Get thee behind me, Satan," by Jesus. And it reminded me of that because, with great power comes great responsibility. These yogis, Jesus, Yogananda, would have had such power within themselves to do great evil as well as great good, and they used it for great good. Use that power that was within them, which is amazing. It makes me more hopeful, because I was saying, I'm not sure how this goes, over the next X number of years, if we're transitioning into a higher plane of existence, with going through the yugas. Do we need to go through some kind of awful catastrophe to wipe out the karma to then be able to move on, or do we do this through meditation and so on and so forth? But I would say it's the latter, fingers crossed with that statement from Jesus used as inspiration.
I feel like sometimes we've gotten so used to the peace, especially in the West, for such a long time, that we don't appreciate it as much anymore as we maybe should. And I really like that Guruji said that in the future there will be, if one nation starts a war, all the others will come and tell them to stop, right? Because that's what we really should be doing, right? Because there can be conflict, and that's a very human thing, but the like letting them escalate into a war is terrible. And the war doesn't really do what you think it does, right? It harms you, it harms the opponent, and it also, like, you send your young people out there to die. And like Guruji said, there used to be chivalry in war. There was like one person with a sword, and there were all those people and that had like this kind of you fought during the day, and at night you would rest. And I wouldn't say it was a sport, but there were rules to it. And now you have like robots fighting other robots and bombs that explode, and it's just
it's like collateral
carnage.
damage is like just accepted, isn't it? Oh yeah, this happened, and then that many civilians died, and everyone's like, oh yeah, okay. But it's chaos. That's amazing that we just accept that fact.
And then one side sends a rocket to kill some people on the other side just to send a message or something, and it's like it is complete insanity. Should we continue reading, Chris?
Yeah, sure. Ultimate peace will come when, by mutual agreement, all nations on earth will have continued peace conferences and will scrap their weapons instead help to destroy the earth's slums. Think how much better it would have been if all the nations and their leaders had gotten together to use their money they were spending in war to do away with poverty of the world. Instead, even when war is over and one nation surrenders the other people to the other, people will continue to live in fear, and there will still be poverty. These present armaments will be junked, and billions of dollars will be wasted. By believing that in brute force, man is engaging in great folly. How long will it go on? How can this be changed? Only when nations have had their brains battered by war, they will begin to realize their short-sightedness. Paramahansa Yogananda.
Seems
Wow.
the battering is still underway, it would appear, in today's,
Yep.
as we speak, in the middle of 2022.
You know,
Yeah.
after so I'll just throw this in, Mike. After World War II, I think it was, they changed the name of the Department of War, I think it was called at the time, to the Department of Defense. And that was this like great euphemism that came into play, where, oh no, we need more money for defense. Whereas the United States, unfortunately, has wielded this great power for what seems to be attack most of the time. But that was something that I popped into my mind when I was reading this, like how many billions untold billions have been spent in the United States alone in the name of defense.
J.K. Rowling goes one step further in Harry Potter and calls it Defense Against the Dark Arts.
Nice. Strong.
That's actually very higher ages of her, because I feel like a war is like the highest escalation of unhappiness in people, right? And it can probably be tackled much earlier before it becomes a war, right? Like, how do you even motivate people? How do you even motivate young people to take guns and go out there and kill other people, right? The level of numbness is very, very difficult. I mean, of course, there are times when war is necessary. The Bhagavad Gita tells us about those times as well. But yeah, sometimes wars, they don't seem to have a great cause, and they're just fought anyways.
In the UK, they kind of like, they do this by tempting people to go in the field. They do that by adding like a layer of prestige, having served in the armed forces, and also the respect that gives, like not just through like social perceptions, in terms of, you know, if you're a high general in the army, then somehow that's directly seen as amazing experience to go into, you know, senior leadership in parliament and things like that, and for big organizations. But also they also incentivize and give a lot of like tax breaks and, you know, other financial incentives in the system that gives people that are ex-military quite a lot of privileges, both financial and social, in terms of respect, which is a intriguing way of doing it, isn't it? Coaxing people, kind of like making people think. And even like I remember when I was a graduate and I deliberately didn't want to work for, and in engineering this is almost impossible to work for a company that does zero work in defense, and I had to basically cut out almost 80-90% of the recruiters that I would have gone to, and even, you know, I chose the railway, but even the railway has contracts with, you know, military you know, depots and transports of goods, and so in some way you can't avoid it.
I think it's worth saying that there is a lot of respect to be given, you know, to the military, and I struggled. I actually had a real good conversation with one of the devotees in London, and I can't recall exactly what spurred it, but it was something to do with war and killing, and is it right to kill take another life in the name of, say, defending yourself? You know, in this case, World War II, you know, we had Hitler and the rise of Nazis. You know, could we not simply say that thank God we did have the defense necessary and the armaments necessary, and we responded, you know, and the Allies responded in a way that was able to put down the threat of the Nazis. So imagine what world we might live in now, you know, without that.
We would be doing this podcast in German.
Yeah. Beautiful language, by the way, Mike. Yeah.
And we would be very restricted probably in what we'd be able to talk about.
It's also maybe good to note here as well that although, like with the nuclear power, there was the assured destruction factor, right? That everybody claimed that, okay, well, we don't go to these extremes anymore because we know it would be, the end of the world as we know it for sure, if everybody fired the nukes. So now, I suppose, whether it's true or not, brute force may have come to some slow ground down halt. And obviously, we all hope that doesn't go further, but there is credit where credit is due, which is, I believe, Russia and the United States, they had that great arms fight, during Cold War, and that came to an end, right? So they disarmed to a very large degree. So maybe there is a lot of hope within all the kind of dark and gloomy kind of tales that we're sort of talking about, and that there is more sense in the world than what we would maybe at first glance think.
Yeah, there's always hope, and I think the earth is still moving in the right direction. It's just sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? About the prestige for generals, I always found it interesting. Like, growing up in Germany and in Austria, we have almost zero of that. Like, we have no military parades, and I think it's because of the trauma of World War II. This is something we don't want to touch. We do have an army, but it's not. We don't celebrate any military victories or anything like that anymore. And that was always, I was always wondering if our approach to that, because I didn't know the UK very well as a kid, but I did know America. They were celebrating their veterans. They were celebrating their people all the time, and there was also this kind of, like Chris said, you are a general, or did you say it, Priyank? You are a general, and now you become a CEO at some company afterwards. And if that was a good thing or not, I think sometimes defense is necessary, and Guruji says that here in the same talk. He says armament is necessary now. A defensive plan is good, but it will not bring ultimate peace. So long as anyone will use brute force, there will always be someone else who will be more brutal. As Christ said truly, if you use the sword, you will perish by the sword. Yeah. So it's not the solution, but the problem is when someone else uses brute force, you have to defend yourself, right? And I think it's just trying to stop the brute force. This must be the goal in every war, right?
I'll give a question to Priyank. Priyank, what would you, if you were to guess, how would you go about using the billions or now trillions of dollars used in military funding, and as Yogananda says, instead of putting it into poverty and solving the poverty of the world, how would you go about doing it, or how would you think Yogananda thought to go about?
How did I think Yogananda did? Oh, that's an interesting one.
And I'll throw in something here, because I think I recall Yogananda wasn't a fan of simple charity. Is that right? It was more about giving people the means, but I can't recall exactly where I heard that from.
No, I can't. Other than waffling, I can't venture anything of any value today. Or do I always waffle?
No.
Well, it's
Chris, you answer your own question.
I have no idea. Well, I mean, I think genuinely, I think, education. Yogananda was a big proponent of that. I mean, he had the Ranchi school, so probably that might be the first port of call. Making sure that there's support networks and provisions for housing, things like that. But I genuinely have no idea.
Because on the one hand, it's very easy to say, oh, our education would be so much better, our health services would be so much better, our infrastructure would be so much better, because all those trillions and trillions of dollars and pounds can go into more worthwhile, social investments. But at the same time, there's been a lot of good that's come out of investment in in military in terms of like technology. There's technologically we're so far advanced, much more advanced because of war and investing in all those things that have trickled down into various sectors of the industry and sparked, domestic and commercial civilian applications for technology. So it's not like a straight answer. In many ways, we would actually be worse off in terms of our technology capability as a species.
Or would we be? Or would we be? Yeah.
Well, that's how we're taught. Well, at university they always say this is we're using this, but this is because of this and this. They always go back to some, or often go back to some, especially in electronic engineering, often go back into some military application that was researched because of XYZ.
Yeah.
All like microchip processors and
so many things.
Also the theory, like computer science, evolved a lot. Alan Turing,
there you go.
He was probably one of the greatest computer scientists of all times, and he had a lot of his achievements in wartime.
Yeah, just to stop messaging messages from being, or deciphering messages, isn't it?
He was, yeah. He had
the internet as well. Sorry, Department of Defense, isn't it?
Yeah, it's endless, the list.
Yeah. It is quite shocking, but I mean that's quite
even things like planes, like we had probably the biggest applications of flight was military, wasn't it? Before they thought of changing worldwide travel.
Put a bomb in it first. Yeah.
More recently, it has been different, right? Like we had those really expensive programs, and NASA was trying for like 2 decades to build a rocket that's reusable, and they couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And I know there's not many Elon Musk fans out there anymore, but he has disrupted industries by just using probably the same kind of ways of research that the military was using, but doing it in the private sector, and having a vision, and having a vision that is achievable, yet very ambitious. And he managed, at least with electric cars and with those reusable rockets, he had success.
Yes, just to add on that, he famously talks about working from first-based principles, and you guys, Prank is an engineer, Mike is a computer scientist, you guys, I'm sure, relate to that, working on first-based principles. And that makes me think that we would be far better off if we didn't have this reactionary brute force kind of approach to advancements in technology and engineering through war. Imagine if we had a little bit more of a relaxed environment that we could just really apply the greatness of the mind to work on first-based principles, to understand how to apply these realizations.
I feel like a war sometimes adds focus, or like having a cause like that adds focus to your research work, and that can sometimes help getting a breakthrough.
Yeah, I remember we're talking about the space program, and in terms of like it's you just talked about was it NASA and the scientific efforts. But I remember when I was at university, my lecturer told me the Hubble telescope has done great things for astrophysics and our understanding of the universe, but if they just turn that thing around 180 degrees, which they're capable of doing, it forms basically the best spy satellite that any country it can get like resolution of like 1 meter, so you can get this beautiful image of pretty much anywhere it's pointing to, and obviously high specification. Similarly with GPS, and as we know, during World War, the US literally switches off GPS for the world. And that would just mean chaos, and that's why all the countries are trying to have their own GPS satellites, even though generously they're making it free for us up to now, or the US is. So yeah, the military is it sounds like it's always for the good of science in the world, but there's always some military undertone.
Mm-hmm. Fortunately, it may just simply be the reality that we live in, though, that the greater good is seen to prevail. And you know, if Yogananda in a previous life was a warrior, as we have talked about before, I'm sure there has to be some kind of sense in this, and in the battle between dark and light. That hopefully you would have to hope that this is all for the greater good over time. Otherwise, yeah, it's pretty grim considerations. But Hitler, you know, he was seen as a very great organizer of people. Imagine if he had been able to use that organization skills for good. And he appears, you know, in this minute where we were to talk about, we see pictures and videos of the Nazis and people saluting and doing the Nazi salute, and how people were able to be rallied. Obviously, it was around typically a lot of pain and suffering. Nonetheless, like, Hitler had this great ability to organize people. So if that was used for good, it would have been very different. 20th century.
I heard this argument before many times, and I would argue that it's much harder to do good than bad. And he rallied a lot of people by appealing to their lower instincts.
Yeah.
And that is something that unfortunately at different times works very well. Seems to be working very well right now as well for some reason. And I would say it's not, I mean, you have to turn off completely your instinct, you kind of the kind of conscience that you have in yourself, and kind of go just for whatever people go for. You just have this opinion right now, and and unfortunately that's what he did, and that's the outcome of it. And I feel like appealing to someone's lower nature is a disgusting trait, and I don't think that should ever be. It should always be called out, and I hope it will never work again like it did there.
Right.
So on this depressing note, but that it's like you said, Chris. There's like pictures of war, and you see Hitler in there, in the movie, and it seems like he is like put in there because he's a bit synonymous with World War II, right? So especially in the beginning time when Guruji gave this talk that we talked about earlier, 1940, it wasn't really clear yet how this war would end, right? What this war would bring. There were like two great powers fighting, and you had no idea what would happen. Luckily, the fascists did not win the war, and we had like actually a time afterwards that was driven by economic prosperity in some countries of the world, and by technological progress. And maybe that's also what Guruji was talking about, that after the war we will find out that war is not the right thing, and we also developed a kind of conscious for peace in the world, even though that isn't the kind of world peace that he was talking about yet. That will come one day. And the last thing we can pick up on is that there's this saying in the movie that the need for the teachings is greater now than ever before, and they kind of fell onto very prosperous, very fertile soil, especially after World War II, I would say, because people had seen so many horrors and they wanted something else. And I think that's one reason why I feel like yoga, spirituality had a real renaissance in the West as well, right? Together, and Yogananda's teachings really flourished after World War II. And yeah, I see Priyank posted here this picture of Yogananda in Tihika. That's kind of where it all started. Very nice. Chris?
Yeah, in the United States, where Yogananda was, they had the baby boomer population come about, right? Sorry, I'm not sure if my internet connection is strong.
Yes,
Can you
fine.
hear me
fine.
okay?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, it's just frozen my end. They had the baby boomer population, right? So there was like this great time of this hope and positivity in the United States, at least, because it wasn't ravished by the wars. So it wasn't having to rebuild. It was financing Europe. So after World War II, after World War I and II, I think the United States basically financed Europe to help them get back on their feet. So the United States, where he was just brimming with positivity and this invincible added like light, almost like if you look at what country in the world could bring about the greatest freedom, United States has always been that beacon ever since it became the United States, because it is such a powerhouse for democracy and so on and so forth. And Yogananda was, establishing himself in the United States at this time, and it's coincident or not, but he was part of that, riding the wave of positivity and the new way of thinking. He was bringing that into the United States as this was all happening. As Mike said, the great light of Yogananda's teachings coming in against the great darkness of World War I and II in that time. So yeah, Yogananda was really riding that wave of positivity in the United States, and thank God for that, because he really helped bring yoga to the West as we know it today.
Yeah, absolutely. And he kind of talks about the responsibility that America has for the world. He said that in a few different places. He said that India and America at some point will kind of be the spiritual leaders of the world. And yeah, hoping for that to come soon. There's one paragraph I can read from Man's Eternal Quest. He says, of all nations at present, India and America represent respectively the acme of spiritually and materially efficient civilizations. India and other Oriental nations have produced the highest types of spiritual people, such as Jesus and Gandhi, whereas America has produced the greatest types of businessmen and practical scientists, such as Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. A combination of spiritually efficient qualities with materially efficient qualities, as represented in the foregoing life examples of great men, can offer us an art of living that will produce in every nationality all-round men of the highest type, physically, mentally, morally, materially, socially, and spiritually. So that's where we want to be. That's what we're striving for. So,
Indeed. Beautifully said. There's also a very nice article in the East West magazine on world peace by a certain Shankar A. Bisay, who is I think he was obviously a student of Guruji at the time, and he was an inventor and a friend of Gandhi as well, apparently. I'll add a link to it, but it just talks on the description, but it just talks basically about the perils of world war and the need for disarming, and the need for a United Nations and a Security Council. All, this was in 1927, volume 2-5. So I'll add a link. So way before its time, and Guruji is obviously being the editor of this magazine and picking the articles and the writers. So it's well picked.
Very nice. And you said there is a poem on world peace in there, right? Do you want to read us out, Priyank?
No, I can't find it. There's quite a long poem, so we won't be able to go into it. I won't be able to pick the best bits.
Okay, or maybe just the end of it.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, so okay, just the end of it. So this one's called, it's Prayer by Renee Alburn Depender. And I'll just read the last kind of section of it. Prayers, when the very soul went forth and found the master spirit, there within their reach, they who have learned to make such prayers have found an endless source of strength, hope, and peace. The pain of life can touch them not at all, for they have found the gateway of release.
Jai Guru.
Jai Guru.
Jai Guru.